My name is Okwui Enwezor. I'm the director of Haus, Kunst, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you here this afternoon. And on behalf of Tate Modern, our principal collaborator in the conference and the accompanying exhibition, and our two institutional partners here in Munich, the Central Institute for Art History and the Department of History of Art at the Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich as well. So on behalf of our colleagues, I would like to welcome you all. I'm thrilled by the overwhelming response to our invitation and how the call for papers for this conference elicited a great deal of enthusiasm from all of you, which shows that you not only share the necessity of the purpose of this conference, but also the urgency of the analytical and scholarly lens it will necessarily shine on the broad topic of art and the post-war condition. So thank you so much for responding. And I will also like to use the opportunity to acknowledge the generous funding support provided to this project by Kulturstiftung des Bundes in Berlin and the Goethe Institute, Munich. A project of this scope and complexity, as we shall see over the course of the next 3 days, is multi-pronged in its affiliations, situations, and networks. And I evoke these three terms here as one entry point amongst many that will help illuminate our collective examination of the art, institutions, and locations of the context of artistic production of the post-war period. The term post-war, broadly understood today, describes the historical period following the end of the Second World War. The years immediately after the end of the war that followed the defeat of Germany in Europe and Japan in Asia marked a turning point in global history. The catastrophe and disarray brought about by the war, with whole cities and countries destroyed, tens of millions slaughtered, a massive refugee crisis that was compounded by the fate of millions of stateless people, were cast against the backdrop of the Holocaust and the atomic bomb. These years were marked on the one hand by reconstruction and rehabilitation, and on the other hand, by a fundamental program of taking stock, asking questions, and a flurry of activities that included putting in place new global institutions that, such as the United Nations, setting up the first global courts of justice, tribunals for war crimes, the Bretton Woods institutions, the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, General Agreement of Tax and Tariffs, GATT, the World Trade Organization, and other institutions. These institutional devices for mediating relationships between nations, economies, and scientific work are central to the promulgation of the notion of post-war. Putting together the foundations of the post-war global order was accompanied by the drafting of key international documents such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the rise of global decolonization and non-aligned movements that would usher in and solidify post-colonial accounts of political and cultural subjectivity. At the same time, new geopolitical and ideological boundary making was sharpening into the long interregnum of the Cold War, a historical juncture that touched every single continent until the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 and the era of post-communism. Post-war, post-colonialism and post-communism therefore describe the ideological conditions of transition of the global order under which the world has developed since 1945. As individual subjects of historical inquiry and cultural analysis, they represent a three-part long-term research and exhibition project developed by Haus, Kunst, and international institutional partners across 8 years of research. The purpose of the research projects of which this conference represents an important beginning is to bring together leading and emerging scholars, historians, artists, curators, theorists, and students to examine the artistic forces and cultural legacies that have shaped the production of art since 1945. In the field of art, the post-war period marks a particular historical and cultural turning point, for it brought about the waning dominance of Western European art capitals and the rise of the international presence and hegemony of contemporary American art, popular culture, and mass media. This shift, in fact, mirrors the changed terms of geopolitical power in which defeated Europe acquired and acquiesced to new patrons and protectors. In Europe, as the Cold War divided the continent into two separate spheres of influence, the Warsaw Pact countries of Eastern and Central Europe, allied with the Soviet Union, and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization countries of Western Europe, allied with the United States, the state of the arts also created a distinct ideological relationship between communism and capitalism, between socialism and liberal democracy. A crude binary to understand the ideological and artistic separation occasioned by these logics is the way the terms abstraction and socialist realism, for example, became two moral imperatives in the construction of artistic practice. Similar divisions of spheres of influence also occurred in the Pacific, with the United States and the Soviet Union again mediating the relationship between these different spaces in the world as two indomitable competitors. However, it would be a mistake, as has often been the case in the narratives of post-war history, to place our entire focus on the North Atlantic world and its Pacific corollary, as if the rest of Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and South America did not exist. Surveys of art history in the post-war period, the so-called art since 1945, are notorious for these kinds of elisions, exclusions, and blind spots. Until recently, art historical narratives have tended to remain on the safe ground of an exclusivist illusion, in which all forms of artistic innovation begin and end in the dominant centers of American and Western European spheres of influence. Until recently, this geopolitical bias often tilted to the advantage of the countries that emerged from the ruins of the destruction of the Second World War to form the North Atlantic Alliance has skewed the understanding and study of contemporary art. While it is not our task to rewrite this narrative, it is nevertheless the purpose of this conference to substantially raise questions about the trajectories and genealogies of post-war art history. In the last 20 years, a new art history has come to the fore that is neither exclusivist in its interests nor exclusionary in its scholarship. New spaces of thinking and research are opening up, just as new maps and networks concerning the flow of art and the assessment of its meaning are being constituted. This rise in interest towards the construction of a comprehensive global art history is forming with a new set of lenses that takes in and understands the value of studying the uneven development of historical methodologies across art histories. With the transformation of the optics of analysis, a vivid world picture of contemporary art is taking shape. I borrowed this from Terry Smith. Inevitably, such changes are attended by disputes that are at once methodological and historical as they are cultural and political. Yet the disputes engage and complicate not only the modernist narratives of art history. They have as well produced research studies focused on regions, continents, countries, individual artists, and so on. New art historical scholarship from across the world in Asia, Africa, South America, the Middle East, and the former East are currently expanding the study of post-war art. It is my hope that some of these issues will come to sharper relief in the course of the 4 days we have to deliberate, discuss, debate, and dispute the givings of the discipline. I want to say a few words about the exhibition. The post-war era emerged necessarily as the aftermath of a terrible period of carnage in the shadow of the Holocaust and the fresh memory of the atomic bomb explosions on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So we have two specific mirroring that we want to engage here, and through that perhaps we can see the rest of the world a bit more clearly. Of course, the Holocaust here in Germany and the atomic bomb in Japan, gives us a picture of these two terrible events. No two events of the 20th century evoke better the portents of mankind's nihilistic capacity to unmake life, and at the same time, in order to save it, create the most devastating weapon capable of undoing the fragile balance that holds together the complex ecosystem on which life thrives. Postwar is an exhibition premised on the construction of a world picture of artistic production across many different parts of the world after the end of the Second World War. But it does not stop there. The exhibition follows a synoptic as well as a panoptic survey of the chaotic processes that followed the Reconstruction period in Europe and Asia after the war. The post-war period exemplifies what the art historian Eric Hobsbawm, in a sweeping and magisterial account of the period in the Age of Extremes, calls the short 20th century. From the defeat of Japan and Germany to the retreat of empire across the colonial world, from the writing of new Atlantic and Pacific charters to the creation of a system of multilateral global institutions, from the emergence of new nation-states to the partition of others, from revolutions to dictatorships, the exhibition probes the creative ferment through which artists are tempted to come to terms with the contemporary reality that the post-war instituted. Through the vital relationship between artworks and artists, produced and understood from the point of view of local and specific contexts, post-war as an exhibition aims to project a broad global understanding of the historical forces that attended the shaping of art since 1945. The exhibition proposes, though through exhaustive research organized across regions and case studies and covering the years 1945 to 1965, to explore, again, the world picture of contemporary art in the wake of a radical geopolitical transformation of the world system. The exhibition then is positioned as a reflection not only on the defeat of the regimes located at the ends of the two oceans, Pacific and Atlantic, but a tracing of the spaces of art following the sweeping lines of the two oceans. By following these two lines, post-war straddles continents, political structures, economic patterns, and institutional frameworks. But more importantly, it engages with the vividness of artistic systems, along with the social, cultural, political, economic, and institutional basis on the remaking of the global order. Conceived as an in-depth study of the post-war period, the first iteration of the three projects, post-war, art between the Pacific and Atlantic, 1945 to 1965, shifts the focus away from the Western European vantage point and redirects attention to the polyphonic and multifocal examination of art. Postwar, therefore, seeks an understanding of the complex artistic imperatives that emerge globally in the aftermath of the devastation that I mentioned. In many ways, I would argue the postwar project is revisionist art history in the best sense of the term, for it proposes a reconsideration and dramatization of the formidable forces of art through the lens of current scholarship. The intention here is the meshing of different forms of knowledge, research, and art. And I do hope that in the coming days, all that I've tried to promise here will be amply delivered by all of you, by the scholars who have come here. And I am incredibly moved by the amount of response that we've received. And I hope that you will join us here every single day until Saturday to engage in these discussions.